She placed a folded piece of paper next to my dinner plate, smiled, and said she thought it would help if we had some things in writing. I had been invited. I want you to understand that first. My son Daniel had called on a Tuesday and asked if I wanted to come for dinner on Thursday. I had bought wine. I had stopped at the bakery near my house for the honey sourdough Eli loved. I had driven 55 minutes and arrived at 6:50, 10 minutes early the way I always did, and sat down at their table and eaten half a meal before Priya got up, went to the counter, came back and placed a folded piece of paper next to my plate like it had been waiting there the whole evening. It was a printed email. I could see from the header she had written it to herself 3 days before this dinner, meaning she had composed it, filed it, printed it, folded it into thirds, and set it aside for Thursday. Daniel was looking at his water glass. I unfolded it and read it. Then I set it down and finished my meal because that is how I was raised, and because some things need a moment before you decide what to do with them. My name is Raymond Kowalski. I am 64 years old. I spent 28 years as a structural draftsman for a construction firm in Kitchener. My job for nearly 3 decades was to read blueprints and find the places where a structure would fail before anyone had built it yet. I was good at it. I knew how to locate the hidden stress point, the weight being asked to travel somewhere it was never designed to go. I thought that skill lived at work. Claire was my wife for 31 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered the names of people's dogs, who kept the handwritten phone numbers of neighbors from 3 addresses ago because you never knew, who made rooms warmer simply by being in them, and never once seemed aware of it. She died of ovarian cancer in the spring of 2021, 14 months from the first symptoms she dismissed as nothing to the afternoon I sat beside her bed and held her hand while she stopped breathing. 14 months is both a very long time and no time at all. Eli had just turned 2. He will not remember her. That is the particular grief that lives lowest and deepest in me, the one I do not often take out to look at directly. She held him once in the last weeks, in the chair by the window on a Sunday afternoon with the low winter light coming through. She held him without speaking for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "He is going to fix things." She meant it broadly, the way people mean things when they are looking at the world from a distance. I filed it away. I was not ready to understand it yet. Daniel is my only child. He married Priya in 2019 after 3 years together, and I liked her. I want to say that plainly. She was sharp, funny, organized in ways that impressed me. She had a career she took seriously. And there was a Christmas evening, the last Christmas Claire was fully well, when Priya had told a story about someone at her office, and Claire had laughed so hard she had to put down her glass. A full, unguarded laugh that Claire reserved for things that genuinely earned it. I looked across the table at Priya that night and thought, she is going to be good for this family. I held on to that memory longer than the evidence warranted. I know that now. But I want you to understand that this is not a story about a woman who was cold from the beginning. Warmth and calculation are not mutually exclusive. The warmth makes the calculation harder to see. When Daniel and Priya bought their house in Guelph in 2020, they needed renovation money. The house had good bones, but tired surfaces, and they were short on budget. I gave them $45,000. This was not casual money. Part of it came from a bonus I had saved across 3 years. Part of it came from Claire's life insurance, money I had kept in a separate account because every time I thought about spending it, I thought about what it represented, and I put it back. I gave it because they were family, and because that is what family money is for. I did not draw up a document. I trusted the relationship. That is not naivety. It is what trust looks like before it has been tested. I drove up twice during the renovation to check on the work. Not to supervise. Daniel had questions I could actually answer because I had spent 28 years in construction. I walked the rooms, spoke to the contractor, a man named Trevor who seemed careful and competent. The house came together well. I was glad for it. I did not yet know what Trevor had actually been paid. The first restriction came about 6 months after Claire died. Priya mentioned on a phone call that they were trying to keep Eli's schedule consistent and that unannounced visits were hard for him. I had not visited unannounced. I said, of course, I would always call ahead. I called ahead after that, every time. Then the 48-hour notice requirement was added. Then gifts needed prior approval because of allergies. Each rule arrived with a reasonable explanation, delivered pleasantly in the tone of someone managing a household sensibly. The explanations were plausible enough that I absorbed each one individually. Then came the one that cost me most. Priya said during a Saturday visit that she needed to ask me something. She framed it carefully. She said Eli sometimes had difficult nights after visits where I mentioned his grandmother, that he got confused and upset, and that they had been advised by someone to limit those conversations until he was older. She said it gently. She held the door open while she said it, which meant I was already on the porch. I did not challenge it. I absorbed it the way I had absorbed the others, but this one was different. What was being removed was not a topic of conversation. It was Claire. The particular grief that lived lowest and deepest in me was being offered as justification for erasing her from the one place she still existed, which was in the stories I could tell her grandson about who she was. I kept calling ahead. I kept the visits to the windows I was given. I brought approved gifts. I did not speak about Claire. The visits grew shorter. One Sunday I drove 55 minutes and stood on the porch for 6 minutes before Priya said, Eli had a cold, and it was not a good day. She said it with the pleasant, managed smile she always used when she was closing a door. I nodded. I drove home in the kind of quiet that is not peaceful. The month before Daniel came to my kitchen, something happened during a visit that I did not know what to do with at the time. Eli and I were working on the old mechanical clock I had been disassembling with him piece by piece, teaching him to understand it before we put it back together. He looked at me very seriously and said, Mommy says you are not part of the plan. He said it the way children say things they have overheard, without weight, already moving past it. I handed him the next piece of the clock and said nothing. I was still carrying that sentence when Daniel sat down at my kitchen table. He called on a Monday and asked to come by Thursday. He said things had felt strained and he missed seeing me. He arrived, we made coffee, and he talked for a while about how Priya had been overwhelmed, how they were building something sustainable for the long term. He used that word 3 times, sustainable. Then he explained that Priya had spoken with a financial advisor and had developed a structure she thought made sense for the family. A contribution to Eli's education trust, managed by Priya through an account she administered. $400 a month, transferred by the first of each month. The access arrangement, the visits, the involvement, would be calibrated to the ongoing contribution. He did not say contingent. He did not need to. I looked at my son, 38 years old, sitting at the table where his mother had made his lunches for 12 years, explaining to me that seeing my grandson was now a managed financial arrangement administered by his wife. I looked at his face, and I saw the particular expression of a man who has repeated a sentence to himself many times trying to make it feel true. I asked, Daniel, is this your idea? He looked at his coffee. He said Priya had put it together, but he thought it was fair. I said I needed time to think about it. He nodded like that was a reasonable response to a reasonable request. He finished his coffee and left. I sat at that table for a long time after he went. I ran the structure of it the way I would run a blueprint. I tried to find where the weight was actually going. I assumed, sitting there, that the design was Priya's and that Daniel had been pulled into it. That assumption felt solid to me. I held it for 3 weeks. I was wrong about part of it, and when I found out which part, it rearranged something in me that had nothing to do with the money. My brother Stefan told me on the phone to let it go. He said family conflict was not worth the cost. He meant it with love, and it was still wrong. I thanked him for listening. The thing that changed my mind was a drawing. I was going through a box of papers one evening, things I had been meaning to file for months, and near the bottom I found a piece of construction paper folded in half. Eli had given it to me after a visit about 8 months earlier. Two figures at a long table, something between them, and at the top in the large, uneven letters of a child who had recently discovered that words could be put on paper, me and Grandpa fixing things. I sat on the floor of the spare room holding that drawing for a while. Then I called a family law attorney named Gordon Ferris, whose card I had taken from a colleague whose custody situation 2 years earlier had required exactly this kind of careful, precise legal thinking. Gordon's assistant put me through the same afternoon. I spent an hour on the phone. Gordon listened all the way through. When I finished, he asked three things. Did I have documentation of the $45,000? Did I have records of every restricted or canceled visit? And did I have a contact at the renovation firm? I asked why the contractor. He said he wanted to understand what the $45,000 had actually paid for before we discussed what it meant. I called Beverly Park the next morning. Beverly has done my taxes for 16 years with a thoroughness that is almost protective. She pulled the bank records on the $45,000. Then I called Trevor. He emailed his invoices the same afternoon. The renovation had cost $28,000. Trevor had been paid $28,000. The remaining $17,000 had moved from Daniel and Priya's joint account in 3 installments over 8 months into an account in Priya's name alone. The account had been opened 2 months after I gave them the money. The transfers were spaced far enough apart to avoid easy notice, but documented, cross-referenced against Trevor's invoices, they were not ambiguous. I sat in Beverly's office and looked at the papers spread across her desk. $17,000 of money that included a portion of Claire's life insurance. Money I had kept separate because every time I tried to spend it, I thought about what it represented, had been redirected into an account my son did not appear to know existed. I thought about driving up to check on that renovation. I thought about walking the rooms with Trevor, satisfied that the work was solid. I thought about believing I was helping my family build something. Then I thought about what Eli had said at the workbench. Mommy says you are not part of the plan. I understood now that this was not a sentence Eli had overheard recently. It was a sentence Eli had heard enough times to repeat it casually, without thinking. For 5 more weeks, I said nothing. I arrived for the Saturday visits. I sat on their sofa. I worked on the clock with Eli, one small piece per session, methodical and unhurried. He told me about a boy at nursery school who could whistle through his fingers, which he considered the highest level of human achievement. Priya brought tea. She was pleasant. She had the smile she always used when I arrived, the one that managed the situation without ever quite landing in the eyes. I did not let anything show. I did not need to. Some things only need to be ready, not announced. In the 5th week, Gordon told me the letter was ready. I did not go to the house on a Saturday. I called Daniel and asked to meet at his office during lunch. I said I had some paperwork he should see. He said 12:30 was fine. He assumed it was estate administration, some loose thread from after Claire died. He told me which floor. I arrived at 12:30 with a folder. Daniel came to the lobby and took me up. A small glass-walled meeting room, round table, 2 chairs. He closed the door and sat across from me with the relaxed, braced posture of a man ready to handle a minor complication. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward him. I said, "Read it in order, all of it." He opened it. The first document was Gordon's letter. 4 pages, precise and complete. The gift, the renovation cost, the discrepancy, the account in Priya's name, the documented transfers, and a formal assertion of grandparental access rights under Ontario family law should the current arrangement continue to be used as financial leverage. He read without speaking. I watched his face, and I will try to describe it accurately. It did not move into guilt. It moved into confusion first, the confusion of a man encountering information that does not fit the model he has been operating with. Then the information began to fit, and the model changed. I could see the exact moment it changed. Something settled, and something else came undone at the same time. I have never seen a face do both things simultaneously, and I hope I never see it again. He turned to the second document, Beverly's financial summary. The $45,000 in, the $28,000 to Trevor, the $17,000 to the separate account. Dates, transfer numbers, account identifiers, Beverly's notations cross-referencing each amount. It was not a document that left room for interpretation. He closed the folder. He looked at the table for a long moment. Outside the glass wall, people moved through the corridor in the ordinary way of people in the middle of a working day, carrying coffee cups, glancing at phones. None of them looked in. Daniel said, "Dad." One word, just my name, said very quietly, carrying everything it needed to carry. I said, "I don't believe you knew." He said, "I didn't." I said, "The letter is not about you. It is about what is documented and what my rights are. I am not here to make this worse than it already is. I'm here because you deserve to know what has been happening and because I deserve to see Eli without a price attached to it." He put both hands flat on the table, the gesture of a man grounding himself through a solid surface. He sat like that for almost 2 full minutes. I did not fill the silence. I had been carrying my portion of this conversation for weeks. He needed time with his. Then he said, "I have to talk to her." I stood. I picked up my coat, and then I did something I had not planned to do. I reached into my jacket pocket, and I set Eli's drawing on the table next to the folder. The 2 figures at the workbench, the large, uneven letters at the top. Me and Grandpa fixing things. I left it there, and I walked out. What happened inside that house that evening is Daniel's story, not mine. What I can tell you is that Daniel called Gordon 2 days later, not as an adversary, but as a man trying to understand his own situation clearly. What I can tell you is that Priya's explanation for the account was that she had been managing household reserves, and that Beverly's documentation made this very difficult to sustain. What I can tell you is that by October, they were separated. The $17,000 was addressed as part of the settlement, documented and returned. The $28,000 that went to the renovation I counted as well spent. The small remaining discrepancy I accepted as a loss and moved on from, because Gordon was right that some things cost what they cost, and not every number comes out clean. Daniel has primary custody of Eli. I have Eli on Saturdays and some Sundays, and whenever Daniel's schedule needs another set of hands, which is often now that he is doing this alone. I want to speak to you directly for a moment if something in this story has landed somewhere familiar. What was done to me has a name: coercive control. It is a pattern, not an incident. It works through gradualism. Each restriction arrives separately, small enough to absorb, reasonable enough on its surface to explain away. The subject keeps adjusting, keeps complying, keeps assuming that the next rule will be the last one. They never are. The rules multiply because compliance is the point, not the rules themselves. When you comply, you confirm that access to the people you love is conditional, and that whoever is managing the conditions is the one with power. The financial element is the mechanism that makes it structural. When someone reframes a gift as an obligation, when they attach a monthly fee to access to your grandchild, they are not managing family finances. They are building a leverage system. The person on the receiving end, particularly someone who trusts quietly and does not seek conflict, will absorb a great deal before they name it. That is what the system depends on. Document money given to family, not because you distrust them, because documentation protects both the relationship and yourself if the relationship changes. A written record of the amount, the purpose, and whether it is a gift or a loan takes 15 minutes and can be the difference between a clean legal position and a documented loss. I learned this the expensive way. Grandparents have legal rights. In Ontario and in many other jurisdictions, a grandparent can apply to the court for access to a grandchild when that access is being unreasonably withheld. Most people do not know this. The people who use access as leverage are counting on exactly that. Now you know. And if you are watching someone in your life being slowly managed away from their family, a parent kept at careful distance, a grandparent following a printed set of rules just to sit in a room with a child they love, say something. Not to create a confrontation, just to say what you see. Because the person inside it is usually the last one to name it clearly. They are too busy trying to comply well enough to keep what little they have. Last Saturday, Eli came to my house in the morning and we went straight to the workbench. The clock has been the project for nearly a year. Disassembled piece by piece, understood in sequence, slowly reassembled. We had been down to the last components for 2 weeks, and Eli had asked me to wait for him before we did the final assembly. I had waited. He set each last piece carefully with a small screwdriver I had trimmed to fit his hand. He did not rush. He has a patience that does not come from me. I think it came through Daniel, which means it came from Claire, which means it is in this boy through a line he does not yet know to trace. He set the last screw, sat back, looked at it. I reached over and moved the hands to 12 and pressed the setting pin. The clock started. We sat and listened to it. That first tick of a mechanism that has been still for a long time is not dramatic. It is quiet, just a small, regular pulse. But it gets into the chest in a way that larger sounds do not. Eli looked at me and said, "We fixed it." I said, "You fixed it." He considered this with the serious expression he uses when he is deciding whether something is true. Then he accepted it and climbed down from the stool and went to look for something to eat. I stayed at the workbench a little longer. I thought about Claire in the chair by the window on that Sunday afternoon with the low winter light and Eli in her arms and what she had said. He is going to fix things. I had carried those words through the printed email placed next to my dinner plate and the 6 minutes on the porch and the kitchen table proposal and Beverly's documents and the glass-walled office and every long, quiet drive home. I had carried them without knowing yet what they were for. The clock ticked on the bench in front of me. I think she knew exactly what they were for. I think she saw it in him before any of the rest of this existed, before there was anything to fix. She looked at him and she already knew. I have thought about that almost every day since.